just welcome to Survive to Thrive. This is our 6th session. My name is Nic Miller. I'm the Executive Director at the Venture College at Boise State. We have been putting this on in partnership with Trailhead in an effort to help companies impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've covered a variety of topics over the past several weeks, everything from how to manage employees to how to get your payroll protection loan. And today we're going to dive into a topic that's a bit more niche, but is really a unique opportunity right now in our community, and in particular for companies that are in need of some technical expertise, which is almost all companies in today's world. But we've got 3 great panelists with us today. Erick Herring, the CTO at VYNYL, Nic Krabs, who's a partner at VYNYL, and Shervin Talieh, the founder and CEO of Partner Hero. And we're excited to have all of them here with us today, and Tiam's going to facilitate the discussion today. So one just quick reminder, please drop your questions into the chat, and we'll get those to Tiam and get them to our panelists. But with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Tiam and let him take it from here.
Thanks, Nic, and welcome to our viewers and our panelists. I'm Tiam Rastegar, the Executive Director at Trailhead. I am delighted to be in company of such amazing talent that has such deep knowledge when it comes to technical co-founders. It's been a topic that's been on my mind recently, as well as on the minds of many Trailhead members and startups that are in their early stage. And with that, before we get to the meat of today's discussion, I want to give the panelists the chance to introduce themselves briefly, tell us a little bit about their organization. And as you do so, if you could just add maybe a quick update with respect to any pivots that your organization has made due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also tell us a little bit about why you may be passionate about this topic of technical co-founders. So if I could start by asking Erick to go first, if you could just give us a brief intro, tell us about VYNYL, and tell us about your angle to this topic of technical co-founders.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to deviate a little bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and let Nic intro VYNYL so we don't do it twice. I'm Erick Herring. I am, essentially a lifelong technologist. Not essentially. I've really never done any other job. 30 some odd years. We're not going to talk about how many more than 30. I've been through, gosh, I don't know, counting VYNYL, 12 or 13 startups. Some of them I've been a founder of, some of them I've been an early employee of, some of them I've been a later employee of. I've been an advisor to many startups. So I've seen this from quite a lot of sides, and I look forward to the discussion here.
All right, and with that, Nic, you have to give us the pitch on VYNYL. So has Erick anyway. So Nic, why don't you go next?
You're muted, Nic.
There we go. VYNYL's a software development and product consultancy. Don't worry, I'm not going to pitch anyone on VYNYL on this call. So, but we mostly work in the fintech and medical space. We've definitely developed some deep expertise in highly regulated industries, which of course those two verticals have a lot of regulation, and specifically around how you build technology in those kind of verticals. And they have their own unique set of challenges, especially at the startup level. Kind of outside of my time at VYNYL, I'm also the co-chair alongside UTM with Boise Startup Week. Was a judge for IEC this year, which Nic and team did a fantastic job pulling off a completely remote IEC. So good job, Nic. And I've really been kind of immersed in the ecosystem in Boise looking at the problems that early stage companies and early stage founders, or sometimes first time founders, really have in trying to, garner funding, launch their products, make wise technology decisions, and spend an awful lot of time just advising folks on how to try and make those first leaps, or maybe even later leaps. And so that's kind of who I am, where I fit, what I do. I'm blessed that I get to have Erick come alongside me, who's the real deep technology brain within our organization. So I'm lucky there. Back to you.
Thank you for that. So last but not least, Shervin, if you can give us a brief introduction on yourself and Partner Hero, and then we'll get started.
Sounds great, thank you. So I'm Shervin, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Partner Hero. We do operations and software work for startups. So our clients are companies like Udemy, Khan Academy, Mozilla, and ThreadUp and Meetup, and a bunch of startups you've never heard of. So this is my third startup. I've hired technical co-founders, or brought on technical co-founders. I was brought on, a technical founder brought me on as the business guy once before. I've been fired by a technical co-founder. I've sat on public company boards, private companies. I've advised many startups through funding, M&A, all sorts of things. You asked a question about COVID. It's having a profound impact on everything and everyone. I think we all know that. We are seeing a tectonic shift to sort of the mindset of Silicon Valley right now. Y Combinator just announced that for the first time ever, they're going to do a complete virtual batch. They've never done this, and they've actually had a strong bias towards everyone being co-located, physically located. And so I think for Boise specifically, and for the topic that you are moderating today, there's some real implications, because I think the bias that has existed and still does, that those walls are going to be shattered coming out of COVID. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, yeah, guys are already throwing me lots of good nuggets that I can latch onto, and I certainly will. And let me try to help set the table here a little bit. So with respect to technical co-founders versus CTO, I do want to get into the delineation between those two. Are they the same thing? Are they different? Does it matter if I'm a early stage startup versus later stage startup? But one conversation I want to sort of highlight for context is a conversation I personally have had with Nic Krabs, and seeing startups in our ecosystem over time and when I say seeing startup, it's mostly us listening to their pitches, and then quickly realizing that when it comes to the technology piece, the product side of their venture, that typically there are some significant gaps, and part of it has to do with where we are located. And part of it also has to do with just the general awareness and knowledge that non-technical founders have when they approach a venture, and the juncture at which they recognize that, hey, I may need some help. And so let's set the table in that the scenario is, I'm a startup, early stage, I'm a non-technical founder, I'm solo at this point, and I'm trying to navigate whether I should even partner up with a co-founder, let alone a technical co-founder. So let's talk about co-founding, if you're the founder, and finding the right partner and why you should do it and what to look for. So let's tackle co-founding in general first. And then as we do, let's assume we say, yes, we want to bring on a technical co-founder, and then let's get into the hows and the whats, into the nuts and bolts of it. So let's take that example for a moment. If I'm an early stage company here in Boise, and describe to me, you as founders, the juncture at which you may have to decide to bring on a technical co-founder or co-founder. Shervin, I know you've talked to this during a lunch and learn at Trailhead, and I remember I took notes on that session. If I could ask you to maybe share your perspective on, the juncture at which you would ask yourself, hey, do I need one? And what questions are you really considering as you do that?
Thank you. I think for what I've seen is that first-time founders approach this question very differently than if you've done this a couple, maybe more than once. A first-time founder typically will put a real premium on the business idea or on the product idea, and they will want to optimize for maybe control or ownership or whatever it may be. And that is why you see, in my opinion, a lot of startups that are not really technical startups, or they're not tech startups, right? They're just, it's a thin, non-defensible layer of technology in something else, right? So if you're, if you have a little bit of experience, or if you're sort of seeking counsel from others like, Tiam and the other guests here who do have some experience, I think the way that I would offer it is this. Startups are a binary game, and most startups will fail. This is a fact, and the data supports it. So knowing that, you probably want to optimize for something a little bit differently, right? And so knowing that, I think the steps that you go through is first start with self-awareness. How much do I really know about this domain and about what it would take to implement this vision? There are business founders who have worked with a lot of technologists before, maybe in a prior life, maybe in their current role, working somewhere else. So they maybe opt towards not having a technical co-founder. Maybe they want to bring on either a CTO or the first engineer or something of that nature. But the second question becomes, am I trying to build something that is going to be defensible over time? There's going to be some sort of moat. It's a technology moat, it's a market share moat, something, right? Network effects, whatever it may be, right? And as you start to ask these other questions, you then start to think about risks. Like, what if something were to go wrong, what would it be, right? Why would this thing fail? We call this a pre-mortem, actually thinking through why something is going to fail. And if you go through this process and you start to see a pattern that leads you to, with a little bit of humility, understand that you actually, there's more to this and you need someone else, I think that's when you clearly say, I need a team. And, Dave McClure from 500 used to say, you need a hacker and a hustler and either a product guy or a designer or something like that, depending on your mix, right? So assuming that it's that sort of those skill sets, what are you bringing to the table? What else do you need? And my personal orientation is that 100% of zero is meaningless, right? I want to bring on someone who has as much passion, if not more, and as much intellectual curiosity about the problem domain, if not more, than I do, with very different skill sets and perspectives to de-risk this venture, right? Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that does mean, for me as a business founder, bringing on a technical co-founder. So that's sort of my framework of asking these questions to determine, should it be a technical co-founder or not?
So you come at it very much from a risk management perspective, as you look at the life cycle of the startup, as opposed to just the immediacy.
There's zero art to my process, zero, right? There's art to other things I do. This is not one of them. I am all about de-risking, and I'm about leverage. So that model removes my ego. Right, that model helps me remove my ego, because I think, if you're a founder, you by definition have an outsized ego, by definition, which is great. But that ego can work against you too. This is one of those controls that you put into place so that you don't get in your own way, which is very, very common for founders.
So that also implies that as a founder, you mentioned the word humility, the humility and the wherewithal to foresee your own gaps, and to bring someone on to really de-risk you as the leader of the venture, right?
Well, I mean, I was fired by my board for a company that I co-founded once. The humility, I wasn't born with humility, and it's something I'm still working on. But I think the data humbles you. The outcomes, look around, the outcomes can humble you. And I've had the good fortune of being able to get back up and try and get it, a few times. And so this is no longer about, if you're trying to build something and it's not like Shervin Inc., but you're actually building something to last, it's a very different mindset.
Let's use this framework of risk management, and let me just, Nic, let me ask you your thoughts maybe on that framework itself, or are there other ways that you also approach this juncture of reaching out potentially and looking for a technical co-founder?
Well, sure, and I think something that you really have to think about is what is your company trying to build? To Shervin's point, I mean, sometimes some of these companies only need a thin veil of technology to operate, get to revenue. They might not need that. So that's something that you and your company have to assess. The genesis for this, for me, is that I see a lot of really early stage pitches, really early companies, pre-product, pre-revenue, trying to get some of that first maybe seed funding or still maybe in a friends and family round, really early. And oftentimes my questions are like, well, how did you test the thesis that you have about your market here? How did you make decisions about what product and how you develop a solution for the problem that you're trying to solve? And then, what is your roadmap like to really get there? I mean, how are you going to validate and test that? And undoubtedly, a lot of these founders kind of fall on their face in those questions because they haven't really done that work. They're working up a lot of assumptions on what it's really going to take, both to build it and then to go test it in the market, which is fine maybe at that stage. But if you're going to graduate and you're going to get to the point where you can actually get the real funding you need to go get your penetration in the market, you have to graduate at some point. And I don't see a lot of, especially for first-time founders, especially for younger founders, I don't see a lot of that maybe self-awareness as Sherman was saying. To really understand that. And so just in the last 2 months, I've probably seen 40 pitches between IEC, and then I've checked in myself with, another 20 or so companies that I've seen their pitch. And, some of those companies were pitching VYNYL to work on their product. And over I kept thinking, VYNYL is not the solution for you here. What you really need is a technical founder who can help you make some of these choices. So not to say that VYNYL couldn't do it. Of course we can, right? I mean, we could bring we could flex our muscles, right, and bring that team to bear to really get it done. But without that leadership voice, both to help you de-risk this path going forward, as well as to help make wise product decisions and technology decisions, you're really flying blind. You're flying blind on what your product's going to do. So that's how I kind of came to this and how I've been thinking about this. This isn't the first time I've had this thought. I mean, over the last 5 years of running Startup Week, and definitely the last 2 with you. How many times have we seen this, Tiam? I mean, you're like, that's such a cool idea, man. I wish they had the ability to execute on that idea, because otherwise maybe it would be a thing, right? So we've seen this 100 times over.
So I think, especially with the current situation, and I keep referring to the current situation, I've personally seen a number of layoffs in the tech sector here in Boise. And somewhat of an assumption is that there are, that there is technical talent within this new pool of talent that we have here locally. And we have these budding startups. Almost seems logical to put one and one together and to kind of remove that constraint that you're talking about, the bottleneck of technical progress.
So I've heard that thought a lot, especially recently with, again, we've seen some layoffs here of technology folks. Something I think that's important to point out is you really have to understand what your technical co-founder is doing as a co-founder, right? What they're actually going to be doing for you. And it's not just writing code, right? That's not the sole function of your technical co-founder. So you have to be a little careful assuming that, a mid-level engineer from a company that just laid off a bunch of their employees is going to be anything close to a right fit. I mean, you really have to scrutinize some leadership capability there, some vision, some road mapping capabilities. There's a lot of capabilities that you have to scrutinize. I'm sure Eric, who's seen this many, many times over, can speak to that even more than I can. But you have to be really thinking about it, because not every technical employee who's, you know, a technologist is necessarily a good fit or even close to a good fit to be a co-founder or a technical co-founder in a startup.
Eric, is there any particular framework or methodology that you've used over the years to come to a conclusion one way or another?
So it's obviously, I mean, we're having a whole podcast about it, so I guess it's obvious this is a deep question, right? I would say that everyone involved in a venture needs to be cognizant of the fact that there is a thing that is getting built. And again, you know, bear with me for a second. That's blindingly obvious, although lots of founders and lots of founding teams forget that. They come to work, and, you know, God forbid they've gotten venture money before they figure some of this stuff out. They spend a lot of time playing dress up and playing company making instead of building the product, which is the thing that's going to launch their company and make it a going commercial concern. And so, you know, the individual engineer writes a feature, you know, the engineering lead writes a subsystem, the CTO architects the overall system, the product person or the CEO, sometimes the same person, architects the product or the platform, the overall product or the platform, which includes marketing materials and the way you talk to customers and the way you structure your sales force. And at every level of that, you have to know what your task is and what your tools are, and you've got to have those tools in your toolbox. And so I agree with what Shervin said, no surprise there. I don't personally, for the instance I'm talking about, which is the first-time founder, first-time non-technical founder, although there's a variation of this, what I'm about to say, that is equally applicable to the first-time technical founder. They underweight different things. And so I don't personally find the risk management framework useful, simply because it presupposes a level of awareness that these first-time founders simply don't have, which I think both Shervin and Nic alluded to, right? Like you can't actually achieve any humility. You might be accidentally humble until, you know, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That was Mike Tyson, right? And so, you know, I think that the advisor ecosystem has got to support these first-time founders by explaining to them how they need to be thinking about building their business, like what tools belong in their toolbox. And one of those things is definitely somebody, whether at an advisory level or on the founding team, to help them strategize about technology. You can't just take your $100,000 of seed money and go to the Ukraine and, you know, make it rain, and then you get a piece of software out of that. It just doesn't work. It never works. You know, you can't do that with $100,000, and you can't do it with $10 million. So I think it starts with advisors, the advisor ecosystem, which you guys are, you know, thankfully trying to fill that gap there. And then, you know, you asked, what about all these laid off people? And, you know, I guess, again, I struggle with thinking about it in those terms, simply because, you know, I guess to paraphrase myself, like, careers are long and pandemics are short, right? And so this is a very much a point in time. And so the idea that all these business co-founders who couldn't get a technical co-founder before are suddenly going to be able to take advantage of a pandemic with laid off people to get a co-founder, that means to me that these people potentially are not going to take care of the tools they have in their toolbox. They're going to have rusty tools. They're not going to be people I want to be in business with. You know, so I think you got to sell. You know, you got to sell from day one. And if you can't sell your very technical product to a technical co-founder, then you should not take the fact that you were able to raise money as any sort of positive sign, any sort of outsized positive sign. Does that make sense? Like if you accidentally raise money but can't sell your idea to a technical co-founder, you haven't actually succeeded.
No, it absolutely makes sense. You know, I talk to many founders who treat an event like an investment or some kind of funding being raised as the end game. They get there, they raise the funds, and then fist pumps. You almost are waiting for them to say, hey, we're done, we can go home now. And so the work then really starts. And Shervin, if I can get you to jump in on this and share your experience on this a little bit with us. Now take out, I'm glad Erick went after the myth of, hey, there's a bunch of technical co-founders running around town. You better go get yourself one before this pandemic is over. I'm glad we touched on that myth, because it's certainly something I hear. And that's what I think this roundtable is good, because things that we hear, we can debunk them if need be. But Shervin, if I think about something you said earlier, again, the scenario is I am a first-time founder. I am non-technical, and I'm going to bring someone in. So this is an idea that I've fostered, I've somehow validated over time, and now I'm looking to bring someone into this baby that I'm about to give birth to. And you said something earlier, the getting someone that is as passionate, if not more passionate, about the problem set, about the vision that you're solving. That to me, just being a non-technical person, it just seems such a long shot to come up with an idea and then to find someone out there who can rally around it, much like I can. Can you share some of your experiences around those interactions with people and how you gauge their level of passion and the alignment and vision that you have with them?
Sure. The job of a founder, whether they're technical or not, is to be a storyteller. And you are telling a story that is designed to convey a sense of what is possible and where we are headed, and that the world would be a better place once this thing that we're working on is birthed and it's out there. You're doing that to recruit your team. And it's not just a technical co-founder, there could be other co-founders in the mix as well. And I love what Erick said. If you can't woo a technical co-founder, you shouldn't be taking advantage of people who are sort of laid off. Now, that's sort of done, it's exaggerated to prove a point here. I do think though recessions and big swings in the economy are actually really amazing times to launch new ventures. And maybe we can talk about that. And it doesn't have to be in a sort of a carpetbagger sort of way. I think it could be done in a elegant way as well. The storytelling is interesting. I know within the first 30 seconds of my conversation with someone if there is chemistry. I can tell in the first 30 seconds. All of us can. But here's the difference. Most of us, we buy our own bullshit. And you need a little bit of that to just make it through the slog of a startup. You have to have a certain amount of that, okay? What you're trying to balance for is meaningful conviction and like inspiration, and let me tell you about the promised land, and we're going to get over this hill and it's amazing over there, right? But you're also looking for feedback, and you're looking to be challenged. You want your assumptions challenged. You want your hypotheses challenged. And that's a good thing, and that's how it's going to get better. Like to Nic's point, it's about validating the idea, testing your thesis, et cetera. Well, when you're pitching someone, that's a great way to get some level of validation. So for a technical co-founder, when I'm approaching a project or initiative, I don't start with talking to them about the technology. And I'm not suggesting that technology is not important. But what I am trying to talk about is like, what is this thing that has kept me up every night? I show them my notebook and the doodling and the charts and my spreadsheets and whatever it is that the artifacts of my ideas. Maybe it's a wireframe, whatever it may be. And I'm looking to see if they are curious and annoyed by the problem. Do they have the same itch, and do they desperately want to scratch that same itch? Or do they have sort of a similar passion for the domain? It could be around health tech or fintech or ed tech or whatever it may be. Maybe there's a you know, there has to be, though, this shared place, because you're going to bring very different skill sets. Where it connects is around that shared domain and the shared value and the shared vision. And I think if you're skilled, you can do this very, very quickly. If you're a little bit less skilled, you're going to have happy years and you're going to think that they're really into it as much as you are. But there are ways to validate that. I'll just give one small example and then we can move on. What I do is I want to see if they're willing to work without compensation. How hard are they willing to work as a side hustle? You can test that sort of fortitude. And I believe, you know, the first conversation doesn't lead to, okay, let's look at the cap table and see how we're going to split this company down the middle. It's not how it works. You meet over coffee dozens of times. You start a repo, you start an Asana board, you start going out and canvassing together, you start whatever it is, right? How much skin are they putting into this thing, right? And you get to know them. And I really recommend spending a lot of time doing that sort of stuff up front, because after you've signed everything, and God forbid you've raised some money, so the debt's converted into equity and the cap table is set and all of that, firing a co-founder is not easy. It can be done, and it happens all the time. But you want to walk away from things when you're still in the dating, courting phase, not post cementing the deal.
So on that very note, you know, VYNYL has 4 partners, and presumably VYNYL has worked through some of this in the early formation days. Can either of you, Erick or Nic, can you share with me and the audience a little bit about, you know, some of the dynamics between the members? You know, are there different skill set involved? Did you ask yourself or come across any of these moments that Shervin is pointing out as you formed and forged Trailhead? I mean, VYNYL, that is.
Yeah, sure. So VYNYL is a slightly different story because mostly, you know, I'll after I talk, I'll ask Nic if he has anything to add to what I'm going to say. But mostly there was no wooing involved, and you know, while again I agree with what Shervin says, I will also say that all of that is more useful to a serial founder, somebody who's done this before, than it is to a first-time founder. The first-time founder is going to be lucky to get anybody who knows how to build stuff out to coffee, because the person who knows how to build stuff knows what that coffee is about. They know that they're going to be asked to do free work. They know that they're going to be asked to sign up for evenings and weekends on top of a job because there's going to be no money. And they know that a very smart person like Shervin or me is going to be in the background telling the founder not to split the cap table up from day one. And so it's a tough road to hoe if you don't have that network from somewhere else, right? And again, this is what this is about, right? That's one of the things that Trailhead can bring, is to build that network. It's why that network is so important. Like, you get it from school, you get it from hobby club, or you get it from a structured ecosystem initiative like Trailhead. And so getting them to coffee is the first thing. As far as VYNYL goes, to answer your actual question, you know, I've been incredibly fortunate in my life, and this is not me taking credit for VYNYL in any way, by the way. I want to be clear. I'm just going to tell the story from my perspective. I've been incredibly fortunate in my life that I've gotten to work with a lot of really extraordinary people. And, you know, 2 of those people were my partners going into this. Both Ian and Nathan, some of you might know, they worked for me at a couple of different times each, in various capacities. and very different skill sets. Nathan is a highly skilled technologist, and Ian is an incredibly talented marketer and product thinker, which is a very rare combination, actually. He's actually a real product manager in the traditional sense of the word, the product marketing framework. He knows how to build the product, and he knows how to talk about the product. And you know, in the last decade, he's added the skill set of knowing how to help other people do those things and become better at being product managers themselves. And so we came together, and we had the incredibly good fortune of meeting Nic and a company that is based in Boise called Pixel and Line, and that's what all came together to be VYNYL, you know. And Nic brought his own extraordinary skill set to the table, which is all around coalescing action in communities. You know, he's got other skills as well, but the one that was most, you know, the one that was most comfortable to exercise, I guess, from my perspective, was this incredibly valuable aspect of building community. So we didn't have a ton of disputes. Like, we knew what we were getting into. You know, I've been asked, you know, why, you know, given those past relationships, you know, why aren't you the CEO of VYNYL? By people in my life, not by random strangers. And it's a simple answer, right? Like, Ian is better at that than I am. I'm a better CTO, even though I've held the CEO role, I've held the general manager role, I've actually held a marketing role at one point, not pure marketing, but chief technology and marketing officer, because we were doing all online marketing. And so it was a very technical discipline. And so, you know, Ian's just better at that than I am. You know, I've got a great community, but Nic is 1,000 times better at community than I am. Nathan is not 1,000 times better at technology than I am, but he's just as good. So that's my answer. I hope that answered the question.
I'm still sending Nathan a recording of this call. You guys can fight it out later.
So it sounds like there's some foundational chemistry, and there's 4 of you. That's why I brought this up. We were talking about a founder adding another body and managing that risk and complexity. Now there's 4 of you. And so with that, Shervin, did you co-found Partner Hero with someone else? I know in the past you've done it one way and the other. So tell us how you founded Partner Hero and why you did it the way you did it.
So this is shameful. I just gave some advice and I'm going to give you, like, I did the opposite. I decided to do this one by myself. I had my prior company, there were 4 co-founders. We ended up getting rid of 2 of them about 6 months in. They weren't adding any value. My first startup, it was with one technical co-founder, myself. We ended up selling that company. We had a minor success there. So I had sort of done the co-founding thing before, at this point, I had a very specific understanding of what I was looking for. And I had enough experience in terms of sourcing. I could bring on a CTO or an engineer. I could interview an engineer. I could look at their code and ask informing questions. Not, you know, I'm not going to be the head of engineering anywhere, but I built enough experience where I felt that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to go. But I don't think I'm a good example, because again, I think Erick's making a good point. First-time founder, right? The questions that you should be asking yourself, you know, there's a discussion about, do I need a technical co-founder, or do I need to bring on a contractor or an engineer or someone, right? I think that's an interesting question, right? If there is existing technology off the shelf that you can implement to have your vision come true. For example, you want to build some sort of e-commerce business. There's this thing called Shopify, as an example, right? Maybe you don't know how to use it, but there's a network and an army of people out there, freelancers, et cetera, that can get that thing set up. Probably don't need to immediately go down the technical co-founder path, right? If it isn't so obvious how to get there, and you should ask questions. You obviously will want to do some of this validation yourself. Or if you're trying to replace some sort of technology, maybe you're more at the infrastructure or platform layer potentially. Those are the really interesting ones. And that's what I did. My prior startup was a deeply technical startup. You're after not only a technical co-founder, you're looking to get patents, that's a whole different ball of wax. It's just a whole different environment, right? Early on, I think that the value that an advisor or someone with a little bit of experience can add is asking some questions to help you understand which path is best for you. Once you know that, then you go down that path. I want to make one final comment. The coffee comment, I love that. They know why you're asking them to coffee. It's true. I go to meetups. I used to go to a lot of them. I don't attend, well, not right now, no one's attending any meetups, but when I lived in Southern California, I would do this pilgrimage to the Bay Area, and all I would do is go to these various, the Python group over here, there was a Ruby on Rails group over there, lean startups, Eric Ries was doing them. I mean, all sorts of different ones, right? And during the breaks, that's where the magic happened. The magic happens when you're sitting next to someone and you have to get out of your shell and explain to them what the fuck you're interested in doing, right? That's not a pitch to raise money. It's just, this is what I'm interested in. This is why I breathe. This is what I'm thinking about doing. And you're going to do that 100 times, at least, right? And then someone's going to start asking you questions like, really, that's cool. How would it work? Blah, 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 blah. I don't know. How do you think it should work? What do you think the risks are? And that's what I mean by the courting, or at least that's one version of it. You know, I think this is about refining the craft of storytelling and real time getting the feedback and the questions. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. For those of us who are parents, I have 4 children. 2 of them are older, and I have 2 very young children. There's this one story that I made up 20 years ago. Over the thousands of times that I've told the story has changed. It's being iterated on as I'm getting very different feedback from these 4 very different children, right? So the story that I tell today to the youngest one, who's 4 months old, who doesn't even know what I'm saying, it's very different to the one that I used to tell the 19-year-old, right? Well, it's the same thing, I think. And to summarize, seek help from someone with experience to help you think through which path is right. Technical co-founder, first engineer, contract developer, freelancer, it could be any one of those. Then get into that habit of putting yourself out there if, in fact, you do need to look for a technical co-founder. And if you don't, I'm sorry, I'm going to hand it off to you, Eric. And if you don't, even understanding how do you communicate effectively what you're looking to build to whether it's a contractor or the first engineer or someone else, that's a critical skill set that you're going to need as well.
In a lot of ways, those meetup interactions are practice for when you have to really get up on a stage and pitch, right? I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there, Eric. I'll give it back to you. But I mean, in a lot of ways, if you to Eric's original point, you know, back at the beginning of this call, if you can't get someone to have that same curiosity as you, you're never going to get an investor. You're never going to get a customer to have that same looking at you. So, anyway, obviously, very different pitches. But.
I mean, the truth is that money is actually easier to get than a co-founder if you're pitching the co-founder. You know, if you start something together, then that's a very different dynamic than if you're going out and seeking someone to help you, because money is multi-threaded, and money doesn't have hobbies or families, or, you know, that's money's job. Its only job is to come to you so you can spend it to build a thing that might make more money, right? But people, they've got one life. You get to live every minute once. And so asking them to live that minute with you is a big commitment. So the reason I raised my hand, though, is, you know, the place this always washes up on the rocks and tears your boat up is on this whole idea of equity splits. And I think one of the things an ecosystem player like Trailhead can do is be aggressively educational about how people should be thinking about splitting equity, right? And I'll tell you the way I think about it, which I'm not saying is the one right way, but it has two dimensions. One is what Shervin was talking about, like how technical is my product really, right? And so let's just say notionally that as a founder with no other founders looking for a co-founder, your starting position in your brain, not said out loud to anyone, should be, I've got 50% of my company to give away max, like 49.9%, let's be clear. And you don't just go and say, oh, I'm going to get a co-founder, they get 49.9%. You know, you don't say that to yourself, and you certainly don't say that to the person that you're negotiating with, because again, let's be honest, you're negotiating. As soon as you start talking with somebody seriously after you've passed the phase where you like them, they like you, they want to be involved, you're in a negotiation, even if it's all very friendly and involves coffee. And so if you're doing something that's almost wholly non-technical, like it's really that very rare, pure business idea, an e-commerce play with a unique type of product, I think Shervin alluded to something like that, you know, then, you know, you're not giving away much of anything at all. In fact, you're probably gonna press your advisors for whatever percentage of their company that they have negotiated with you. You're gonna press them to manage the Ukrainians, right? To, you know, not to pick on Ukrainians, but they do good work. And they're not as expensive as Americans for the most part. You know, but if you're building the next distributed database, again, like Shervin said, you know, you're probably gonna need to give away 100% of whatever that piece of the company is, right? And the same logic happens at the next layer, by the way, which it's important to lay that groundwork, because the truth is, let's just say you did give away 50% of your company to a technical co-founder. You're very happy. Everybody's running along. You're spending your $100,000 of seed money. At some point, you're going to need to either get a big gun in product or a big gun in marketing. And you know, if you're lucky, you've gotten to the next step of valuation. You've raised a really big institutional round. Then you can hire that person, right? But if you're not, if you're still bootstrapping or still using, you know, I consider using seed money, friends and family money, I consider that still to be part of the bootstrapping phase, then, you know, you and your co-founder need to be thinking that you're going to need to make room for a third slice, right? And again, you know, that slice might not be 33 1/3%, right? And I'm using simple numbers, obviously. And so everybody's got to have a framework for how they think about that. And it really, to me, has to do with how technical is my product, you know, how much of the company is committed away, but it can't come from a place of greediness and a place of hoarding. You know, you're not a dragon on top of your pile of equity treasure. It's hard enough to bring something into existence without, you know, without thinking too hard about that stuff. You'll never be sad. I think I can say this with confidence. You'll never be sad that you were fair/generous with your equity with the people you're going to be spending 18 hours a day with for years.
Well, and also I think early or maybe first-time founders forget that it's not actually gold yet. Like, you're the dragon on a pile of nothing, right? You know, and so maybe it's a potential of gold, but I hear a lot of, especially
now I wish I brought all my
founders,
option paperwork to wave around, like.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like, you're a very sad dragon right now. And so, I mean, I think I hear a lot of times when I'm talking or maybe kind of casually advising startups, they get very, very, very precious with their equity at the detriment of their needs, right? And so, you know, that's a self-sabotaging mechanism where you can't relinquish even enough control to satisfy the goals of your company in front of you. I mean, kind of going back to that ego and some of those issues that come up, especially for some founders. I've seen that a lot. In fact, the last 2 times I've given the advice that they should go recruit a technical co-founder instead of trying to hire a firm. I've given that advice twice in the last, 3 weeks. Both entities said, well, we're very precious about our equity right now. So, here's our 60 grand, you know, you sure you can't build it, right? And, you know, that's a mistake. That's a mistake that those groups were making. And so, you know, I think that kind of to that point, I think, you know, a lot of these founders really have to acknowledge that they have a potential of gold. Hoarding, you know, in your mountain on nothing never makes you any more valuable or any richer. So you really have to be less precious, especially very early on, especially if it's filling a need that will get you to the next level. You know, when Tiam and I went to Seattle and we sat with Pioneer Square Labs, I mean, you know, gosh, they're a studio that takes something like, you know, 40%. I don't want to misquote the numbers here, but I mean, a substantial percentage of the company early on. And, you know, that seems at its face value an exorbitant amount, but the truth is the amount of acceleration that they're able to take that company becomes, you know, very valuable. It's about 40%. Yeah, you know, it's probably fine to own 50%.
Yeah, and none of that is to say you should be cavalier either. You should care about your equity, right? 100%. But that's, again, a place for an ecosystem player like Trailhead to help these founders think about this in a sensible way and provide benchmark data and experiential data to help them think about how much they should be thinking about incentivizing with equity versus cash versus, you know, potential other incentives. Because the first-time founders, which again, those are the ones I'm focused on, you know, they need all the help they can get, especially thinking about this kind of stuff, because it's hard and it's emotional.
Yeah, I'd like to really get Shervin's take on this point that the two of you have brought up, Eric and Nic. Let's dissect this for a minute. Equity being a tool that a first-time founder has to grow the company. How do you not stand in your own way in that sense, Shervin?
I talked earlier about like the mistake that a lot of first-time founders make is optimizing for control. You're optimizing for time, for speed. The lifeblood of a tech startup is the cycle time and the feedback loop, right? That won't be meaningful to someone until they get many reps at it. So the very simple way to think about it is, how quickly can I put the shittiest thing possible in front of someone to start to see if they will buy or touch or use my product or share it or whatever the call to action is, right? And so the 40%, I think, is an excellent example that Nic gave in terms of a studio. Like, that seems like a lot of money, right? Or a lot of equity, right? And it is, right? But it's relative, right? So what are you giving up for that, right? As a first-time founder, if I were to tell you that there's a 90% chance that you're going to fail, and the things that you're going to learn will increase your odds the second time around exponentially. Let's start there, right? Now, your approach to what you're doing is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be like, oh, this is a throwaway, let me burn it to the ground as quickly as possible. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, this won't be your home run. It could, but none of us think that. Even not knowing your idea or where you went to school or whether you're technical or non-technical, the data suggests it's not going to be a unicorn. That's just, again, I can say that blindfolded, throwing a dart, I can say that, right? So knowing that, the thing that you should optimize for is getting this idea out as quickly as humanly possible and assess all of your options against that. In my opinion, that is like the most stripped down way of approaching this conversation. It's not about how much equity, those are all secondary or tertiary, or even like how well do I get along with this person and all of that stuff. You really are trying to say, like, how quickly can I stand this thing up and see if it does the thing that I think it's going to do.
And that really goes back to those validation cycles that you have to have. And there's several different levels that you graduate to through the process, but you can never really graduate to the next level until you've satisfied those validation cycles. And sometimes, you know, some of the really early ones are right, like you have the right team, maybe, you know, have you got some good advisors, right? Have you thought through the problem well enough to take a first stab at it? But the kind of next step really is the important one, which is, can you convince someone to write you a check for it? And if you can't, you know, all these conversations about equity were really just wasted time.
The thing I'd like to add on to what Shervin said, I think it's a really incredibly valuable insight. The thing I'd like to add is that since you're probably going to fail, I know it's not the right framing, but let's be, you know, we're amongst friends here. So since you're probably going to fail, you should be thinking about the fact that you're probably going to want to do this again, and you might want to do it again with the same people, with a different company. You know, if you're lucky, you want to do it again with the same people because the people were right, the idea or the timing or the funding or whatever wasn't right. And some of the biggest unicorns have come out of teams that are on their, you know, third try, but the team stuck together. And so every step of negotiating and interacting with your partners and all of that, you know, needs to come from a place of humility and respect and fair dealing. Because again, you know, careers are long. Like if we're lucky, we've all got several more companies in us. You know, I guess if we're really lucky, then we have 0 more companies in us because the one we're in is going to take off and be a rocket ship and be huge, right? But to Shervin's point, that's not the way to bet.
Well, that's some great insight. I want to make sure that we have about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we use that time wisely. And I want to pivot the conversation to something that's come up a few times and Shervin's pointed out to, hopefully wanting to get back to this topic. Let's talk about the immediacy of the economic situation, the potential recession, and I say potential with a smile on my face, that's going on, and the opportunities that may arise because of it. And Erick, early on, you know, you talked about, you know, this might be a myth that you can, you know, go find technical co-founders, you know, laying on the side of the street right now waiting for non-technical folks like me to start a venture. So let's talk about the current situation and what opportunities may come out of recession-like environments like we're experiencing now.
Well,
Sure.
I mean, I think you also just have to look a little bit at the last recession, right? I mean, we had Venmo, Uber, Groupon, Instagram, you know, I mean, Pinterest, Slack. These are all companies that happened in the last recession. So I didn't want to steal Erick's thunder again. I keep doing that. I'm sorry, man. Okay. But, you know, of course, in a recession, there can be opportunity. So anyways, I'll hand it back over to you, Erick.
Thank you. Yeah, no, to be clear, recessions are great times to found a company. What I was responding to was strictly this idea that there's some, you know, utility to founders to the fact that lots of people are laid off. And, you know, no matter who it is, technical people, non-technical people, you know, there have been plenty of times when the market has been flooded with high quality, you know, marketing people, plenty of times when the market has been flooded with high quality creative people of various kinds. And it's never the right answer to treat people in a utilitarian fashion. It just isn't. And not just to be a good human being. It comes back to bite you in the ass because recessions don't last. And everybody can put their head up and look around and see what other people are getting and how they're being treated. And, you know, then, you know, one of your wheels falls off your car because they realize, you know, if they didn't know it all along, they realize at some point that you're taking advantage of them and you always were. You know, and the truth is that can swing very quickly, especially with technologists. So let's say you find somebody wandering around on the street, you know, with their MacBook Pro, you know, asking if you've got a project to hand them because they are unfortunately out of work, right? And so
Raymond's run dry.
Right. And so you toss them a bone. You put on your Daddy Warbucks hat and you toss them a bone. Actually, I guess Daddy Warbucks didn't have a hat. Anyway, whatever. And you toss them a bone. I mean, the truth is 3 months later, after they've worked on your project, they are very likely to find a job if money is not coming out of your enterprise. And again, I want to be clear with my founder hat on, that might actually be okay. I don't think anybody here who started a business would say that you get out of it completely unscathed, right? Like sometimes you do things that are not ideal in order to make the business successful, in order to get to the next step. And so, you know, I'm not saying never do it. Like if you've got access to some things because of unfortunate circumstances for others, you might want to take advantage of it. But if you're trying to build a long-term relationship, you're trying to get your forever CTO, that is not the way to approach it.
So if I may just, the first startup I had was actually the last 2 startups I've done were in recessions. I know how to time them well, apparently. Here's the way that I think about it. A situation like this causes us to step back and think about what's really important to us. And a lot of the mechanisms and apparatus of sort of safety and security sort of vanish. They just disappear, okay? People who had never been unemployed before have to go file for unemployment, as an example. People have to like update their resumes. They have to like put a message on LinkedIn looking for my next opportunity. It's very humbling, very humbling. And the myth that a big company, you're going to go and spend 30 years there and then you're going to retire and all that bullshit is every decade that is eroding even more and more, right? Even with technology, we're seeing, like, there was a period of time where, you know, the world, you know, discovered Java, then it was .NET. Now, like, many people look down on that. Like, that's what the hell is that, right? But yet we don't have enough COBOL programmers because our the unemployment systems, many of them at the state level, are basically old mainframe systems, right? So how do you approach this with the sort of the honor and grace that Eric is mentioning, and also just this reality that we're all suffering? What a tragedy, what a situation like this does is it connects us. You cannot escape this with your Ivy League education or what country you live in or your religion. There's no escaping it. This is impacting everyone, right? And that condition of human suffering and the way that it connects people, it allows us to cut through a lot of the noise. And you can really open up and be vulnerable, and you can allow others to do the same and make it safe. And I think really magical things can happen. There's self-discovery. And then there's also the opportunity to share that with others. And there is a little bit of alchemy to startups. I know earlier I said this is, you know, the art and science. There's the alchemy part is, I believe in it. I really believe in it. And you can prime the alchemy, right? You can actually bring elements to that can potentially lead to better outcomes and to better formulations, potentially, again, right? So are you doing something honorable, or is it nefarious? Like, to the point that was made earlier, are you sort of putting your cards on the table? Hey, here's what's going on. It's a concept. I want to just quickly get validated. And here's what I'm thinking we do for the next 2 or 3 big milestones. Let's not go build, like, future-proof our technology. That's not what we need to do right now. We're just trying to do this little thing over here. We're not ready to even pitch. Let's just put up a fake name and a landing page and see if anyone even is interested in it, or do any number of tests that, you know, they teach you in the Lean Startup Method. I think that's okay. And I think what my experience has been, at least, a lot of people are thirsting for that. A lot of people are looking for something that's real. And if you can provide that, and it goes back to being a great storyteller, like really sharing your story and the story, right? I think it's entirely appropriate.
So you see this unprecedented collective experience that we're going through as something that actually can potentially unify and help us relate to others.
Oh, like nothing before. We are so good at even manufacturing differences between ourselves. Like that's what we do, right? Oh, I don't shop there. I don't watch that show. I don't listen to that, whatever it is. Like it's all contrived, right? Something like this, you want to talk about humbling, right? This is the definition of bringing everyone to their knees, right? And we're not even through it yet. We're not even through it yet. And because of who we are, very soon, many of us, most of us will forget these lessons too, by the way, right? But right now, as we're in the thick of it, right? There's empathy. To build amazing things, if it's art, poetry, theater, I don't care what it is, you need empathy. There needs to be empathy at its core, right? This is an environment that is forcing us to be empathic in many ways, right? So I'm not saying I'm optimistic. I think I don't want to trivialize what's going on, but I think there's humanity, there's compassion, there are other things that are going on, and I think we should stop treating Boise like it's a second-class citizen. I mean, like what we don't have, Silicon Valley. Fuck that. Like I don't want to be Silicon Valley. I left there because they're all douchebags. Like it wasn't interesting to me to be there anymore. I love what we have here, and I don't think we should.
We're gonna be good friends, Shervin. I didn't even know we're soulmates.
See,
I don't know how many times I've heard the Silicon Valley is full of douchebags from Erick. So you're hitting a very.
I mean, I think we should. What do we have? We have 4 distinct seasons. We don't have a bad view. We have people that are nice, and there's no angle to them. Like what do we have? Let's double down on that, right? Architect the community. I mean, as you all are, I'm sort of very, very late to the game here. To not from a sort of what don't we have? We don't have enough engineers. We don't have enough product managers. Okay, whatever, right? Yeah, we don't. But we do have something, right? We got us. We got a bunch of bright people who decide to give up their Tuesday morning to listen to me. They're foolish, obviously, for doing that. But yeah, I see it a little bit differently.
I very much appreciate what you're bringing up. Music to my ears. Let's talk about how full our glass really is here in Boise as opposed to what we don't have. Nic, I have to say what Shervin just said is sort of forcing my hand and with this question to you. Are you optimistic about the Boise ecosystem with what we've done in the years leading up to this situation now and how we may potentially recover from this? Shervin brings up empathy. You read off a list of startups that emerged after a previous recession. Do you see similar ingredients for this coming together now? What's your take?
So, yeah, it's a big question, but a lot of different things I definitely spend a lot of time thinking about up late at night. If you want to know what I burn for, a lot of times it's the community building part here. So I think about our ecosystem oftentimes in kind of trajectory terms about where we've been going. And now this moment has happened, has disrupted in some regard some of that trajectory, but like an ecosystem is a collection of people, right? And most of those people are here still, and so I don't see a lot of that disruption happening long term. This moment feels like it's very overpowering. We're all watching the news about kind of the next greatest depression, right, coming down the pipe, staring down the barrel in some regards. But the people are here, the people who have these ideas, the people who've been moving and shaking and working, and yes, hopefully that there's this opportunity to have more empathy with each other about what's going on. And I think that's happening. So, optimistic is always a tough phrase to use right in this moment, but I have been optimistic about our community for a long time. And especially in the last 5 years, watching how much gasoline was put on the fire between so many entities. I mean, we have like 80 organizations that work on Startup Week with us. And for a community our size, I mean, we're in like the top 3 or 4 startup weeks in terms of effort and funds raised and attendees. I mean, like that's in, we're a barely top 100 market. So that tells me that there is something special here. There is something great here, and that's not going away, right? That energy, it's not going away. So anyways, I mean, I think we'll come out the other side of this. I do think that a lot of the startup founders that I know haven't hit the pause button even for a second. They may have shifted gears. They may have changed about how they're thinking about risk. They may have, decided to make this, that, or whatever move. Maybe they even retain some employees that in normal circumstances they might have let go, right? I mean, I've seen that too, the other side of it. So, but I don't see any of those people throwing their hands up in the air and going, oh my God, the sky is falling. Not a single one. None of them.
Eric, can I get your final thoughts on this, Eric, before we wrap up?
Yeah, for sure. At the risk of waxing too philosophical or getting out of my lane, Boise has been carried along by its sheer wonderfulness, quite frankly. It is a beautiful place. The people are nice. There are good educational institutions. There's good medical infrastructure. Schools could use some work, but they're going in the right direction, I think. Trailhead is a piece of the next phase because the ecosystem is not, the ecosystem is the whole pond. It's not just the fish. It's not just the tadpoles, right? Like we're the fish swimming around in the pond, but the pond also has to have the right plants. It has to have the right amount of oxygen. You can't pour pesticide into it, right? And I think this next phase that Boise is going to go through, especially for this group, I'm looking around, I recognize several of the names on the Zoom here, especially for this group, I think we need to internalize that we need to tend the pond, right? And that means a lot of things that are not startup-y, right? It means we need to be paying attention to housing policy, right? The houses have become incredibly expensive in Boise. That's got to get fixed for real. Infrastructural stuff has got to get fixed. If you fix that stuff, continue going in the right direction, invest in medical infrastructure, invest in educational infrastructure, continue to invest in those things, I should say, then, there's a chance that Boise can grow in a Boise way, right? And grow quickly, but still retain its essential Boise-ness, which I think is really important. We don't want to copy Silicon Valley or Southern California or any other place like that. And we also can't count on the rising tide because a lot of what Boise has gotten in recent years is the rising tide of the economy. And, it's kind of like ecotourism in some sense. People are like, Boise's really nice. I'm going to move there. Oh, I happen to be an engineer. We better have a startup, right? And so it's time to be more deliberate about that, I think. And I certainly appreciate what you're doing, Tiam, and we try to do our part there as well. To be more deliberate about that. But I think this next phase has got to be a broader approach. And I think it's got to involve all of the civic infrastructure. And people like us have got to make sure our voice is heard about what's important in order to attract the next 100,000, great Boise citizens to build out the startup and other ecosystem. So that's it. Philosophy over.
No, thank you very much first of all, for those kind words, but also for this perspective. I almost called you an outsider, but for a perspective from someone who frequently travels to Boise and knows Boise and its community well enough, but yet lives somewhere else. So I really appreciate that outside perspective, not outsider. That said, I really want to just take a moment and thank the three of you for the time that you put in this morning. I myself enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you for keeping it real on all fronts. And thank you for offering your insights into the topic of technical co-founders. And with that, we're out of time. I do want to be respectful to everyone who's on the call as well as the panelists. Nic, if you can, Nic Miller, if you can just wrap us up and send us home for the day, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you guys. That was really interesting, and appreciate all of the perspective and insights and advice. I think there's a lot to be learned here. So we will wrap up now. We'll post this video to the Venture College YouTube channel. We will send out an email as well. So Eric, Nic, and Shervin, if you have any resources or any things that you want to share with us that we can distribute to the audience, we'll be glad to do that. Next Tuesday, we're going to have another session. This will be focused on very early stage companies, or not very early, but early stage companies. We'll have two guests, Paul Price from Gather and Goodwill Ventures, and Janessa White from Simply Eloped. So it'll be a really interesting discussion, in particular with Gather and Simply Eloped. Both of them are companies that are built around social gatherings. So I think that their stories and how they've been able to pivot and maintain during this challenging time will be interesting. So we hope to see everyone here again next week, and thank you for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you.